All right. Hi, good morning. James Vincent speaking from, actually calling from Venice Beach, California. So it's 2:06 in the morning. Good morning, London. Good evening, California. I'm going to talk today about building human-centric brands in an era really where I think it's fair to say that technology has kind of outpaced the human condition. I was lucky enough to work with Steve from 2000 to actually with him till 2011 until his sad passing, and then 2014 was I was with Apple. So all the way through the sort of supercomputer in your pocket from iPod and iTunes, all the way through to the iPhone. So feeling somewhat responsible for the introduction of all of that to the world, I've continued to try to do what I can to help brands mitigate, bring the benefits of, help explain technology. And I think there are some responsibilities, there's some clear opportunities for brands to fill those holes, and I want to talk about those today. Look, it's really obvious, the iPhone being the iconic product that does that, but what it tends to do, technology, is it really plays to efficiency, convenience, and speed. And of course, what we know about those things, even an app, let's say, the speed of efficiency is so, it's as short a point as possible, as few taps as possible to getting to do what I want to do. And in that journey, perhaps what we lose is some of the truth, some of the humanity, some of the empathy and connection that's so critical to our interactions as human beings. So, this is probably no shock to most people on this call. I think the challenge, we're particularly seeing this in the US in the last few years, but a lot of the large companies today do seem more inspired by economic progress than human progress. And I'm here to argue that there are brands and there are opportunities for founders and companies to take a positive role, and that those companies actually have a huge upside when they do it right. So I'm going to talk about Apple. I'm also going to talk about Airbnb, Snapchat, and Glossier, just for the younger millennial women amongst us. This is a chart I've used for I don't know how long with every founder I meet, and everybody has a different answer to the question. When I say what got you here won't get you there, they go, oh, wait, let me tell you. It's actually just stolen from The Marketing Chasm, which is that famous marketing book from 20, 30 years ago. It's just that leap that you have to make, I think, once you've gone from kind of a creation stage to a more, maybe you've dominated a small niche. You have some decisions to make as you leap. Often this is the stage that we work with founders, with companies, about what are their founding values, what kind of company, what kind of dent in the universe, as Steve would say, is your intention to make. And it's our belief that the brands who are human-centric make that leap. And they make that leap to become sustainable businesses. And it's not to say that there, of course, aren't hundreds of companies that are not. I just am here to, and I think in this time, as we go further and further, those brands that are human-centric are the ones that people look to follow. The value systems that they represent, the social contract that they present, is an incredibly positive one. But there are also some responsibilities that come with doing that. So I want to sort of highlight that through a little bit of storytelling. I'm going to start with Apple, of course, because that's the one that gets people interested. Steve, of course, wasn't about setting out to change the computer industry, although, of course, he did that rather well. I don't think we even talk about it as the computer industry, but at some point, of course, it became something way more than that, and just simply technology that we use. He set out to change the way people think creatively. And I'm sure that all of us have seen the various keynotes. I can absolutely hum the iPod keynote, the iPhone keynote, the iPad keynote. Actually, if you're ever thinking of introducing a product, just go look at those. Go look at the thinking, the way that guy's brain works in terms of how to get the sense of the new with the familiar in the introduction of new technology. I think oftentimes new technology, new on top of new, was always what Steve warned us against. And so he would always explain things through the lens of the familiar. And I think a lot of challenges with technology and tech people is that they go new on top of new, and people go, I don't really understand that. So few people get to you, but starting a conversation amongst the familiar is certainly a great way to move forward. So I'm actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to give you a potted history. I don't think this appears in any other book or any book. This is my version of the potted history of the last 40 years, building one of the world's most human-centric brands. And there's a reason why I'm doing it this way. It's really to highlight, and it wasn't kind of sequential in this way. I don't think in 1984 Steve sat down and said, oh, I must go do 5 chapters. But he did some fairly seminal things that I think created this sense that we all have, which is this connection with this brand called Apple. And each time, at every step, he was very clear and intentional about ensuring that people understood the relationship that you have with Apple. And so right back there in 1984, still thought of as one of the best commercials ever made. I don't claim any credit for being involved in that. But you know, back in the day, Computers for the Rest of Us, and I actually happened to watch it yesterday, showed it to my 14-year-old son, and he thought it was pretty cool. But Ridley Scott shot the commercial. You have a very, very dystopian view of the future, Blade Runner-esque. And this striking blonde lady runs in with the red shorts and throws a hammer into the screen and says, you know, the introduction of Macintosh will be the reason why 1984 won't be like 1984. But they defined their enemy. And, you know, back in the day, that was definitely a fundamental part of making sure you know what kind of brand you are, which is to set yourself in relief to the situation around you. In 1984, there certainly were some, I think IBM was the big bad guy back then. But setting your stall out very clearly, defining your enemy, what are you up against, and where's that going to take you? And then actually, of course, this isn't a smooth path, because in between times, Steve gets thrown out of his own company, runs off and creates Pixar, happens to come back, creates OS X, which everyone's is clearly the savior of Apple because they've gone nowhere. And within 6 months, calls Chiat Day, which is the agency I work with, and just before I arrived, and they made a statement because they were pretty much going bankrupt at the time. And Steve Jobs called my colleague Lee Clow and said, "Can you come up? I need you to do some work with me." It came up with a campaign called Think Different, which, if 1984 isn't one of the best commercials ever, this is at least, I think, you know, I've never seen this poster in so many people's offices, or not necessarily Einstein, but one of the many crazy ones, crazy enough to change the world, are the ones that do. You know, fairly ballsy move in 1997 when the company is pretty much bankrupt and he's paying money to put this onto the Super Bowl, and just declare a notion of standing out, standing for something, and of course using these incredibly celebrated creative people to stand with them and to stand for what they stand for. So that's 97. I'm going to flip to, I arrived on the scene in 2000 and was involved in the introduction of iTunes and iPod. If you remember, back in iTunes days, the record labels were suing 13-year-olds for using Napster. That was their radically modern solution to things, to the industry capitulating in Napster and LimeWire, people just assuming that music was going to be free forever. And Steve had this philosophy that I think if you bring people good solutions and you charge them a reasonable price, like an iPod that carries 1,000 songs, not a CD Walkman that holds 12 and skips, and songs that are 99 cents each on iTunes, you can actually bring positive behavior back into a place that seemed like it was going off into nowhere, and artists were going to be creating stuff for absolutely nothing. So 1,000 songs in your pocket, the Silhouettes campaign, anybody that's seen those or haven't seen them for a while, I think they still stand up. And they, you know, they were brought in, the hardware, the software. Steve's thought was always asking me, where's the head, where's the heart in an idea? The heart in the idea is the visual of the person loving the music and dancing and being completely lost in their music. The branding device is the earpod wires, which I still hold on to because I feel like, anyway, sadly, that was one of the things that I brought to the world, but everyone's got earpods now. But for those people still wearing them, thank you. And 1,000 songs in your pocket was the I think the brief I wrote actually ended up being the line at the bottom of the ad. And you know, it's really, that's the beginning of a supercomputer in your pocket, very clearly through the lens of music. You know, you start with a place that people connect with. It's simple, but it's also kind of becoming the beginning of Apple becoming a culture brand. And before that, it was a very on white site, very techie brand, or kind of out there only for the you know, the graphic designers with long hair at the back of the office. And of course, now everyone has a Mac and an iPhone, or many people do. Speaking of Mac, I'm actually going to talk about step 4 as being, and I just picked this out just because I was so intimately involved in it, but the Mac versus PC argument. And this, again, this isn't meant to be the 5 steps that all brands must follow in order to become a humanistic, human-centric brand, but this just happens to be a good way to tell the story. I remember Steve back in whenever this was, 2005 or something like that, said, we have 3% market share. That makes no sense. We're not going to do that. I want 90% market share, which if you ever spoke with Steve, that seemed like a perfectly normal suggestion. Actually, this campaign of Mac versus PC, which is just so simple, was based on this notion that there's 27 reasons why Macs are better than PCs, but how the hell do you put 27 reasons in advertising? So you create a metaphor and you build a lot of humor into it, and you pull them apart one by one, and you make sure that it's clear that you're better, not just different, and in fact both. So the 90% was actually, the target was 90% of all computers over $1,000, and that's indeed what they are today. So I guess what I'm talking to here is it's sort of an expositional, a product focus, done in an Apple-like way to make a bigger point. And then, of course, 2007, September 2007, delivering the inevitable only because of the last 35 years and everything that led up to it. There's an app for that. You know, I'm pretty confident a lot of the platform upon which everything, much of the, particularly on mobile, has been created in the last 13 years was on the premise of an app and the notion of an app. So there's an app for that, there's an app for this, there's an app for just about anything on the iPhone. Was a phrase, I think, again, written as a brief, written as an idea, turned into a campaign, turned into a reality of so many businesses now built on the platform of this technology. So I think what you see through these 5 steps is the building of a brand through product. Defining in this way, and I can give you some other examples where the brand gets defined in some other ways, but here defining your enemy, standing for something. And then the next 3 are, you know, iPod, Mac, and phone, but signaling, showing, being somewhat didactic in explaining and delivering the inevitable. I'm going to give you a couple of other examples just so so that we broaden the aperture a little bit. So after Steve passed away in 2011, I stuck around and tried to help for a couple of years, but ended up moving on and went to see a few founders around that time, Brian Chesky being one of them, Evan Spiegel, who I also worked with, and Travis at Uber, who I didn't. And without being too onerous in making that point, I think the answers to the conversations we had were that they were trying to build humanistic brands. So let me talk now a little bit about Brian Chesky, who I have a lot of time for and speak to regularly, and spent 3 years building from the Balo, which was the that logo that looks like a piece of the human anatomy. I don't think I need to tell you which part. You can all use your imaginations. From the introduction of that through to a campaign called Don't Go There, Live There, which was this notion of actually very similar to Steve in a way. It wasn't about changing people through travel. It was changing how people live through travel. The premise of which was, you know, people don't want to own things. They want experiences these days. And so I worked a couple of days a week for Brian and his team inside of Airbnb, building the experiences, all of these different experiences, the experiences product, the sort of incubator for that. And it got launched within the Trips platform, which was kind of a keynote-like explanation. And I think as you look at all the way up until what Brian did just recently, as he had to lay people off, and just the tenor with which he did that, the thoughtfulness of how he shared that information was testament to everything that the values are that Airbnb lives up to. And I think when you spend time with Airbnb, you realize what kind of a phenomenal organization it is that he's built. It's, I think, one of the world's largest community-driven super brands. And it really was very important internally to build hosting culture and that humanity, to understand how important it is to host and being welcome. And I would argue that anybody here that uses Airbnb brings their best human. I don't know about you, but I'll go on Airbnb and I'm like, oh, that looks like a good place. And you bring your best human. You go, oh, I'm just happened to be in town with my lovely little family. Would you mind if I stayed? Your place looks lovely. And you go, you stay, they leave you a little note, you have a little package, you feel the humanity of each other. And then at the end, mostly when you have experiences, you go on Yelp or TripAdvisor and say some horrible things. They actually very, very thoughtfully and carefully thought about the review process. And the review process, the first review you do is a private review. And the private review is like, yeah, you know what? There's a little bit of whatever's damp in the downsized toilet, and maybe you need to put some more toilet roll or whatever the silly little things are. You do those privately, and then you do a public review. And your public review says, you know what, it was awesome. I loved it. It was great. And I think that separation of those two things was just a very intentional way to create a human-centric brand that most people, I think, have a great relationship with. It allows you to live like a local and see a city in a different way. But it's created through the harmony of human connection. I'm going to jump to another example. Emily came to us. I work in a company called Founder, FNDR. My explanation for FNDR is that we couldn't afford the vowels. That's a big Chinese company. So we lost the vowels and we ended up with FNDR, but we're Founder. We work with founders, as you can see. Emily came to us. We talked. She was up on stages telling everybody about brands built through conversation. And after a couple of conversations, I was like, I don't think you need our help. And she's like, are you kidding me? I actually am about to explode in size, and I have these incredible values, but I don't want to go through it. And I want to make sure that we build the playbook for growth so that we intentionally grow. And so everything you see, and I don't claim too much credit for Emily because she does a terrific job on her own. But we just sort of helped her with the language, the places in which those values would come up. I think anybody that has either a younger daughter or is a millennial woman understands that for beauty, within social, women want to spend a lot of time talking and not just buying. And it's just a real understanding of conversational commerce and a people-powered ecosystem. You go into a Glossier store, you see young people, they're looking at each other, they're saying, what does this look like? Do you like that? You're taking pictures of each other. And the brand is really about people first. It's a people driven ecosystem, and products come second. There's I can tell lots of stories, but the pink pouch, for those people that know it, is this wonderful container that you can throw in your Chanel lipstick and also have your Glossier and other products. And people look across the room at each other and say, yep, you're a Glossier person too. I really think she's just at the beginning of building a superpower of a brand, very much built on community, and connectedness between a group of people. And those niches, it's kind of multi-niche. I always talk about how the new mass is multi-niche. And I think that's the best way to think about it. Of course, the technology that many people know more about than I do. Steve used to laugh at my inability to understand technology, but maybe that's why I can explain it to other people. Multi-niche being the new place. So what Glossier is about, instead of just a niche, it's multiple niches. You'll find your niche there. And of course, that's the opportunity of technology now. So you go to Glossier and you found your niche of people and you have a conversation. So that's Glossier. Next example is our friend Evan at Snap. I knew Evan from a bunch of years ago. As I said, I went to see him in 2014. I ended up working with Brian, and then ended up working with Evan, just with Founder recently in the last few years. You know, it's obvious. I think I don't have to tell this story too strongly, but when social networks became social media, the price of free became them using your data and letting down liberal democracy, I guess, to not put a finer point on it, but selling your data, not being clear about where it's going. But from a human point of view, I think the big insight there was, I walked on the beach with Evan and I said to him, lying to strangers, truth to friends, and that was 3 or 4 years ago, before everything that's come out with Facebook and sort of all of the things that have been going on. But I think from a human behavior point of view, lying to strangers, truth to friends, lying to strangers is what you're doing on a lot of social platforms. You are lying that you're not a happy family. You just posted a picture of your happy family. You're actually getting divorced, or whatever the thing is, whatever behavior people have come to do on social media that is not real or true. Strangers, you can't have 15,000 friends. I'm sorry, I don't believe you that you do.
Hi, James. Sorry,
are we done?
You've got 1 more minute left.
Yeah, no problem.
Super insightful presentation, but 1 more minute and we've got to wrap up. Thanks.
No problem. I'm almost there. So we work with Evan, create a campaign called Real Friends, which is all about friendship. It snaps many things, but it is definitely about real and being honest and true and just friends. It's a small group, Dunbar's Law. It's less than 15, and that's how you get intimate. And I just very quickly just want to say I'm proud of all 3 of the CEOs that I just talked about, because they've all been incredibly human-centric responses to the crisis, whether it was Airbnb's having to lay people off and writing that very thoughtful note, Evan Spiegel's call for a reparations commission, which was super smart, and Emily's Glossier donating $1 million, kind of the first of all of them, and they all followed suit after that. Next wave of business. This is a chart that probably should take longer than I've got, but I just think that we're over this moment, and I think our opportunity in the next decade, and human-centric brands can help us with that, to move from disruption to adaption, to move from distribution to contribution, and from distraction to interaction. All of those things are human things on the right. And if I only got 10 more seconds, I'm gonna leave it with Steve. This was the last chart he showed in public. Technology alone is not enough. It's technology married with the liberal arts, married with the humanities, that makes your heart sing. And I would ask each of you on this call, what's your story and how can you be a human-centric brand?
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.